Hi guys, this is Ali.
And this is Aliya, and you're listening to the Ivy EdTalk.
So recently, a lot of people have reached out to us with some of the challenges they face with their children in terms of language delays that have taken place. So we thought, why not just make an ed talk about language development and the various concerns around it.
And very often, I think we focus on the speech and articulation part of language, which has to do with the phonological development of language, and not so often on the meaning making in language, which is often a cause of concern. So today's talk is going to be all about semantic development, which is the development of meaning in language.
Yes, so let's start. My question to you, Aliya, is can babies understand us? And when we are sort of talking to them, can they communicate back to us?
That's a very interesting question, Ali, and also it's very it has been researched a lot. So there is evidence to suggest that children are listening to their mother from the womb. They can hear her voice, and when they come out and out into the world, they actually have a preference for her voice. So that was measured by seeing that whenever the babies were upset and they heard their mother's voice, they calmed down and their heartbeat slowed down. And so
They're
there is
definitely understanding us.
they're definitely understanding. And there is also been a lot of research on what is called motherese or parentese, which is the infant directed speech that mothers use with their babies. It has a higher intonation, the words are said in a more slower way. It usually uses vowel sounds that the child would be able to pick up easier.
So like the baby sounds that we make when we're talking to, like, oh, mera baby and all that kind of things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so those are like what you call it, the motherese
This
or
is
the
called,
parentese?
this is motherese or parentese, whatever you want to call it.
And what's the role of these?
So the role is basically the parents use these sounds to communicate with the child. They bring their face closer to the baby because babies cannot see very well, so they bring their faces closer to the babies and they make eye contact and they start to mouth these utterances which are very vowel oriented. So they'll be like, oh, how cute. So there's a lot of focus on the vowels. So children are able to either they try to imitate that. You will see the baby's mouth moving in response to the mother's.
So you recommend that parents or mothers or caretakers should do something on those lines?
Yes. So there has been research to suggest that parentese is something that is good for babies, and it's a good way of communicating with them.
Yeah.
And they prefer looking at the mother's faces or other faces, so it's also something that they feel comfortable with.
It's funny because I always thought babies are like little eating, sleeping, and pooping machine, and now there's so much happening behind the scenes. That's so.
I know it's
amazing.
very intriguing. There was this research. It was a long time ago, which was called the still face experiment, in which this doctor, I think it was Dr. Edward Tronick, he called these mothers with the little babies into his lab, and he would ask them to play with them the normal way they would play with them, and then suddenly at a cue he would ask them to become completely unresponsive and go like. That was the still face part of the experiment. And what was seen was that first the children would like not know how to respond, they would be confused, then they would become distressed and they would try and reconnect with their mother, try to reestablish the interaction.
So there is like they're trying to sort of want the same sort of energy or same sort of expressions.
Yes, and if even that didn't happen, if the mother continued her still face, then they would become withdrawn, which was also very disturbing. But it did show that that experiment was really quite an important one, because it showed that babies are primed to communicate socially.
Makes sense. So once this is done, then comes the words, right? And then what's the process of this development of sort of understanding of words?
Well, this is a recurring question. Honestly, a lot of parents say that, my child isn't talking yet. They're 18 months old. They haven't said the first word. But my neighbor's child is talking, or my cousin's child is talking in full sentences.
There's a lot of comparison that happen at this age.
Does happen, and there's always the boy-girl difference as well.
Yes.
But yeah, it's
where boys are slow to talk.
well, I think it happens that girls are quicker to pick up on a lot of the things, but really, honestly, it is also a function of how much language input is directed towards the child. I've seen little boys who are super.
But I was reading somewhere
verbal.
where sort of boys tend to sort of speak later, in general,
In general,
or from the data.
in general, yes, but yeah, I have seen exceptions to this rule.
Got it.
Yeah.
So, is there a time for parents to start worrying? I mean, at what age do you think they should sort of have a valid concern about speech or language delays?
Well, every child is different, but there is a basic rule of thumb that by 18 months, maybe a child should start speaking 10 to 20 words, which can by 24 months become 50 words with some word combinations. But then again, every child is different and they reach their goals at different times. But this rule of thumb basically says that if you're somewhere, if at this point, child, let's say you're 18 months and your child is not even saying a single word, then you may want to reach out to your pediatrician and ask why not.
Mm-hmm.
So, another thing I usually ask parents to do is to notice if their child's language development is following a typical path or an atypical path. So, for example, if your child is starting out with one word labeling, etc., they are using gestures to point, etc., and if they're by maybe 2 years making some kind of word combinations, mommy come, daddy go, so they're on the track. They may be delayed, but they're on the track. Atypical is when a child may lose words they once had, or if their tone is very mechanical, or if they have echolalia where they're just repeating sentences that is picked up from, let's say, a television cartoon or something of that sort. So in that case, they may want to again reach out to somebody.
So when the language acquisition is not natural,
Yeah.
that will be a challenge. So how does from here does a child sort of start learning a word?
It's actually very organized, and children learn words by looking at their reference. So
Referent meaning?
So yeah, a referent is basically the thing that is being referred to. For example, a four-legged furry referent running around the house and barking is a dog. And the child will map the word dog onto that animal. Now the way it happens is that every language assigns words to their reference in a very arbitrary kind of a way. So the reason that a dog is called a dog and not a cat is very arbitrary. Somebody somewhere decided that they wanted to call this animal a dog. But children who have a hard time understanding abstract concepts or arbitrary concepts, they don't find it easy to link the word dog with the referent. They may want to call it a woof woof or a bow wow because that's the sound that the dog makes.
So they somehow have a very sort of not arbitrary but more non-arbitrary way of looking at things.
They do.
So like a feature of a dog like barking would be associated with its name.
Yes.
So in a way they're like inventing words, right?
They are. They invent words. So like they may call the train a choo-choo or
Makes
something of that sort. But this is something that kind of resolves over time.
Okay. And they become better at learning the words. So does that have any implication of how we teach them words or how we teach vocabulary for that matter?
Yeah, so for that, let me tell you how children form mental images of words in their heads. Basically, the way that we all learn language and the first words and how they are developed in the head is in the brain, is basically they you look at a referent and you map the word onto that referent, and initially you may only associate that word with that referent. So for example, continuing with the example of a dog, let's say if a child has a Labrador in the house and they know that it's a dog, they may only associate a dog with the picture or mental image of a Labrador. However, over time, they will also understand that, let's say, the neighbor's chihuahua is also a dog.
Mm-hmm.
Because then maybe somebody points it out and say, oh, did you see that dog? It's a chihuahua. And gradually what happens is they start mapping certain features and associating certain features with dogs.
So the category of dog will become richer and richer.
Exactly.
And more complicated.
More complex. It will organize, it will reorganize. They will try and put in certain features and prototypes in their mind about what what a dog should look like.
And the funny thing is, dog is one sort of word. It might be happening with multiple words at the same time, right?
Yes, exactly. So you were asking about an implication, and the implication for this is basically vocabulary should usually, in fact, I recommend should always be taught in meaning-related ways that help children build semantic networks. For example, if you're teaching a child about dinosaurs, you give them the overarching field of dinosaur, and then you give them the different dinosaurs within that field, like Spinosaurus or Brachiosaurus or whatever. And similarly, for the younger children, what you can do is, if you are playing with a car, a train, and a truck, so it helps if you say, okay, look, this is a car, this is a train, and this is a truck, and all these are vehicles. So you're kind of giving them the overarching field, as well as within that field what really is the link between all those terms.
No wonder, like these early curriculums have these theme approach, right? Like I
Thematic
remember
approaches,
our children would have like a vehicle theme or pets and so on.
Yeah, they have like transport or all about me, because in all about me they're learning all the vocabulary that is related to the parts of the body, etc. And in transport they're learning all the different kinds of vehicles, etc. So that's kind of something that curriculums use as well. And
so is there any number of times, or is there any formula to how many times you have to say a word to a child to make that word be part of the semantic network, as you call it?
Yeah, so a semantic network is basically this entire thing that we're talking about, where children are forming these or organizing and reorganizing vocabulary according to the semantic relationships between words. And there isn't a specific number of exposures that you need for a child to learn a word. In fact, sometimes children learn words really quickly. Sometimes you may need multiple exposures for a word that is not used too often for them to understand it. But there are certain things that help. For example, if you repeat the same word in different contexts, that helps.
Okay.
Or if the
can you give some examples, like if a teacher new word.
Yeah, so let's talk about book reading. You're reading a book with a baby or a toddler, right?
Yeah.
And then they come and they ask you, can you read this again? And you find that you're reading the book again, and then a third time or a fourth time. You should read it as many times as the child wants to, because basically what's happening at that point is the child is becoming familiar with the vocabulary in the book. So initially, in the first read, the child may only be maybe even overwhelmed or stimulated by the images in the book, by the context of the book, but slowly with time they start focusing on the words in the book.
Makes sense. So the first time when you read a book, it's all about learning new words, and probably they're getting used to the context. So there are a lot of what you call stimuli, right?
Yeah.
And once you get sort of settled with all that background sort of context and all that, then you start focusing on words, and that's how the words will become part of your vocabulary, because now. So multiple reading of the book
reading, and this is actually called contextual repetition. The more you repeat in the same context, the quicker they'll pick up the vocabulary.
It's funny because for older children also, like sometimes what is seen is this, that when they are given a comprehension where they know the context really well, they end up doing better in those comprehension, and that's true for even like for when you're giving your SATs or GRE and all that, those reading comprehension that come when children or when even adults know the context, they end up doing better in those reading comprehensions.
I know, because I remember when I was giving my GRE, I was asked to read it 3 times before I answered the questions, and I think those reading it 3 times, the purpose was for me to absorb the context and then start focusing on the finer details.
Yes.
Okay, so coming back, basically there's another thing that helps, is that if the referent is in the baby's line of vision, if it's visually dominant, we would call it.
Okay.
So if, for example, a ball is far away and I'm pointing at it and I'm saying ball, versus if the child is holding the ball in their hand, playing with it at that point in time, and they're visually, it's dominant and their eyes are directed towards it, so it's very likely they're going to pick it up quicker.
So this becomes an opportunity for you to quickly make a lot of learning through the ball to happen.
Exactly. So if you see a child is attention
So
is
what
directed
you're
towards
recommending
something.
basically is to make sure that things are visibly dominant for a parent to first start using that word
Yeah.
or thing. Makes sense.
And then finally, then there's the third thing is that, for example, if a word is taught directly versus if it is incidentally learned. So let's say you and I are talking about the moon in front of our baby, and we're pointing to the moon, we're talking about it. So yes, she will eventually pick it up, but the greater chances if you explicitly point towards it and you say that hey, this is the moon. So explicit teaching of vocabulary is always better, although children do pick up vocabulary by being around adults and listening in on them.
Yeah, I mean, so the other day we did an experiment, right? I mean, in fact, you were doing an experiment, so where you showed Nadine many different color cards. For example, there was red.
By the way, for those who don't know, Nadine is our 2-year-old.
Yes, sorry, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, we refer to Nadine as if everyone knows who Nadine
Yeah.
is. Nadine is our 2-year-old daughter who is learning to sort of do all these things that we're just talking about. So the other day, I think you showed her 4 cards, right? One was red, one was blue, one was yellow, and these 3 colors I know that she knows really well. And then there was the 4th card, which was a maroon card. So what happened there? What was the experiment?
So basically, we did this experiment twice. We did it with cards and we did it with crayons. But basically, we put a couple of colors that Nadine already knew, like red, blue, and yellow, with a color that she didn't know, like maroon. And what happened was that we said, okay, can you please give me the maroon card? And she was able to, through a process of elimination or something, she was able to figure out that the one that she doesn't know is most likely the one that mom is talking about, and so she picked that out and she got it to me. Then I tried the same thing with crayons also, and it worked. And this may have been a very good example of fast mapping. In fast mapping, basically a child may have minimal exposure or information about a word, but they still pick it up by contrasting it what they already know.
So this is an example of implicit, or it's just fast mapping?
I think it's just fast mapping.
Okay.
Yeah.
Implicit would be where they just pick the words from the environment.
From the environment, you're talking about something, and then they pick it up. Sometimes it's really funny. Parents say that, "Oh my God, I said a bad word in front of my child," and they picked it up.
Yes.
That kind of example.
Yes, that happens to all of us. So, are there any kind of words that the children pick up faster, like than other words? Is there
well,
any
I do
research
know
regarding
that. Well, I do know that that the early, let's say the first 50 words or so of a child includes all grammatical categories. There are verbs, there are nouns, there are adjectives, but there is a certain a preference for nouns, which is actually called noun bias. And about 40% of the first words that children learn are nouns, but that could also be a function of parents only pointing out nouns.
Focusing more on nouns.
Yeah, because we are more prone to pointing out at things that we can see, concrete objects, and saying, hey, look, that's a table, that's a chair.
So we don't know much about whether the nouns are basically picked because we focus a lot on it, or basically or kids like to learn more about nouns.
Yeah, but there is a noun bias in word learning, which is actually established in different languages.
Okay.
And apart from that, children usually pick up a lot of familiar words. For example, words like blankie and ouchie are picked up more before, like words like vase or painting. They include different categories as well. For example, bye-bye and peekaboo are very social words that they're exposed to, and all gone is another word that is more to do with food or something of that sort.
So just to come back to something which you said, like children will pick up more of that things which are sort of said more or uttered more.
Yeah.
Does that mean it's a function of the input and output? Like, for example, more of high quality input will result to high quality output?
Yeah, I think this is a nice way of putting it. It's kind of like a like a processor. The more the input, the more the output. Yeah, exactly. So basically, adults have a very important role in a child's word learning. So I would say the number of adults would also count, but also the quality of the input, the amount of the input, all these things matter. So if you're one person living with a baby, then you would have to provide a lot more input to be able to get the same result as a child living with, let's say, 5 adults in a household.
And so that's why probably larger the number of sort of exposure to people or children, the better will be your language development.
Exactly. I mean, we can see it ourselves with our own children.
Yes, with the first child versus the second child.
Yeah, our first child was born in a household with 3 adults, 4 adults in fact, and his second child was born and directly brought into a schooling environment where there were teachers and
because
there
we
were
were starting
students.
Ivy at that point in time, and she was just hardly a few months.
She was months old, and she would just get all that kind of input from everybody.
So larger the number of people that one get exposed to, larger will be the amount of language or number of words that you may know.
And then it's also the quality of the input. So
makes sense.
So when I say
and that's also good, was good for Nadine, because she was going to a school environment which is language
so there were
rich
students coming up to her and talking to her, and there were adults talking to her, etc.
Yes.
So a couple of things that I would want to say here are, we may not realize it, but the structures and sounds of language are being mapped into a baby's brain when we don't even know at that point. We can't even imagine, but it's happening. And then as gradually your baby grows older, there are a couple of things that really help if you keep these in mind. For example, gaze behavior. Gaze behavior is that if you are looking at something, is your baby, and you point it out, is your baby also looking at it? And if they are, I think it's a great time to provide information about that. Like if your baby's looking at a chair and you're also looking at a chair, and you point to the chair and you say, hey, that's a chair, so it's very likely that they will pick up the word quicker. So like
joint attention.
That's joint attention, exactly. Yeah. And then it also helps if you look at what your baby is interested in. If you are pointing towards something but your baby is not that interested in it, try and look at what your baby is more interested towards.
Okay.
Right?
And make that as an opportunity for them to learn.
Right. And similarly, gestures help a lot in mapping reference. So this is actually called ostension, but using pointing is one of the very important features of word learning. That's a very big part of how children communicate. If they want something, they'll point to it. If they want to know what it is, they'll point to it. So it really helps. Then thirdly, another thing is informative labels. So parents who provide a lot of informative labels around what they are talking about, their children have higher vocabularies later on. For example, if we say that we're reading a book and we're talking about bats, and then I say, you know what, bats live in caves, or bats have wings. So that kind of information really helps the child to kind of build their schema around a topic.
Okay, so when you're reading a book and let's say you encounter a bat, you can take that as an opportunity to talk about the bats.
Exactly.
And that becomes like a way of making the vocabulary rich around a topic.
Yes, it does. And book reading has to be dialogic, so it's very important that when we are reading to children, we don't just do a one-sided read aloud, but we also talk to them about what we're reading. That's the best part of like one-on-one reading that you can do.
Okay.
Also,
so just to reiterate, what we're saying is just that make that book reading as a dialogue.
Yes.
You need to ask questions, you need to listen to their sort of answers, and then maybe respond to them, so that book reading can become like an opportunity to build vocabulary.
Yes. And then there is something that is also important, is a lot of times parents who talk about inner states, like I'm bored, I'm happy, I'm sad, their children tend to be more empathetic.
So emotions, right?
Yeah. So we may think that small children may not understand if we say we are frustrated or we're bored, but children do pick up on feelings and contexts.
So it's good to talk about these feelings in context, emotions
Yes,
early?
it is. I think it's good to talk about it as early on as possible, because children tend to pick up on feelings, and by getting a name to those feelings really helps them start, voicing their feelings as well.
Feelings,
Yeah.
and that's great.
Yeah. So yeah, all these are ways infants, toddlers, and young learners can pick up meanings of words in language. There's a lot that we could discuss. For example, difficulties in word learning, and maybe later language or semantic development, such as sentence structure, syntax, bilingualism, and how that kind of feeds into this entire process. But I think it's enough for today.
I know
We'll leave
it's
that for
enough for
another
today, but
day.
I think a quick recap could be good. I mean, today we discussed how children sort of acquire or gain vocabulary, and we discussed how from very early children have parents have a role to play. The motheries or parenties are really important, and those sounds that you make actually help a baby to learn language later. And then we also talked about how it's really important for us to start building their vocabulary by looking at how that language or those words are acquired, and they are acquired in a more category form, in a more semantic form, and which basically means that you need to keep on enriching the category. So ways to make that category to become richer is the language rich environment. Try to read to your child when you're reading. Make it more of a dialogue, more of a discussion. Pointing is good. Getting their attention on something through gaze or otherwise, and then using it as an opportunity to learn could be a great way to go about it. And then also it's important to make sure that how you talk to your child, like higher sort of slower speech or focusing on some sort of words and so on and so forth. Have I missed out anything?
I don't think so. I think you've kind of covered it all. Language development is a pretty complex process, but by actually ensuring that we provide high quality input to youngsters, we can build on their language development for later as well.
Great.
So we hope this has been a helpful
Yes.
discussion for you. And I think that's about it. We sign off here. Always yours in education.
Ali and Aliya.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.